الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا فعلمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا كريم. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakum Allahu khairan for being on time. So inshallah we are discussing on this session key LGBT issues in family relations, and this is with our wonderful Sheikh Mustafa Umar. Sheikh Mustafa Umar, mashallah, has a breadth of experience in the Islamic education field, studying at places in Europe, in the UK, and Nadwatul Ulama. He is on the board and a member of the North American Fiqh Council, as well as a fellow at Yaqeen Institute. So without further delay, I'm going to invite Sheikh Mustafa Umar to educate us on key LGBT issues in family relations. فليتفضل مشكورا.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. Before I begin, just a real quick show of hands. How many of you got a chance to read the entire paper before this session? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So about 10%, which is average, because that's there's a lot of papers I know, and you don't have a chance to read through all of them. But that actually gives me a good 30 minutes to actually talk about the paper and summarize it for you, inshallah ta'ala. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let's begin. This is going to be covering the Islamic guidelines for dealing with children and other family members who identify as queer, and it's important for us to first understand what that means. So, my introduction slide is gone, but that's okay. Definitions are extremely important for us to understand, and it's important for us to understand history. And when I gave a talk 10 years ago on LGBT or on homosexuality or on transgenderism, I remember discussing this at AMJA, actually in I think 2016 or 2017. Many Imams were not aware of what these terms really represented. Many Imams actually thought that transgenderism is somehow connected with same-sex attraction or homosexuality. I remember also that about that time, about 8 years ago, people told me, they said, what you're talking about and what you're giving khutbahs about is a California issue. And you California people, you're all crazy over there. Right? Like I texting y'all. And I remember there was one sheikh from the AMJA Council. It was Sheikh Walid Basyuni. He told me, he says, people don't understand yet that what happens in California is going to start spreading throughout all the states and is going to start spreading throughout the entire world. And sadly, that is exactly what has happened. So I'm going to be operating under the assumption that the Imams have a better understanding now of what is going on, because they're directly affected much more, depending on which state you're in, much more than it was 8 years ago or 10 years ago. Despite that, it is very important for us to understand certain terms and certain definitions. So most of you have heard of LGBT. And you've heard of the initialism LGBTQ, and then LGBTQIA, A+, 2S added to the beginning, and all these letters keep changing. Let us go back and understand what is the Islamic way of looking at these issues first, so that we can actually address the Islamic position when it comes to family. So the term homosexuality, as we're going to define it, as Muslims are going to define it, basically means somebody who's having a romantic or sexual relationship, or wants to have a romantic / sexual relationship with somebody of the same sex or somebody of the same gender. I'm going to use these terms interchangeably. So somebody, if a man wants to have a romantic relationship with a man, they're called gay, the G. If a woman wants to have a romantic relationship with a woman, she's called lesbian. L and the G. Then there's a B, and B stands for bisexual. And bisexual means that somebody wants to have a romantic or sexual relationship with both males and females. So both. Now this category, it's important for us to understand that it's actually mostly a redundant category. It's a redundant category because the norm in the world is heterosexuality today, as well as in the past universally. So adding this term doesn't make much of a difference. The reason why it's added, and I'm going to mention this in a moment, it's added because it's trying to normalize homosexuality at a greater level. And what's interesting is that bisexuality, people who claim to be bisexual, or people who claim to be homosexual, sorry, the majority of them report that they actually have feelings towards both males and females, romantic attraction. This is very important for those of you who are going to attend our presentation tomorrow. Dr. Umar Hussein is going to be speaking more about this, on whether this condition can be changed, whether it can be, altered, repaired, whatever it may be. It's very important to know this fact. This is a fact. This is a scientific, statistical fact that is recognized by everyone across the board. So that is the G. So the L, G, and the B are 3 letters, but they actually refer to only one concept. And that concept that matters is homosexuality or same-sex attraction. And there's a difference between the two. We'll talk more about it, in our session tomorrow, but it's important. One of them is about desires, and one of them is about wanting to act or acting upon those desires. So we have LGB, one concept, homosexuality. Talks about romantic feelings, romantic actions, etc. Then we have the T, and the T stands for transgender. And transgender, from an Islamic perspective, is referring to a biological male that's claiming to be female, or vice versa. So that's the T. Now LGBT is an initialism that has been used since the 1990s, but it's only referring to 2 concepts. Concept number 1, a romantic sexual feelings or relationship. Concept number 2, gender re-identification. So we're dealing with 2 letters. The Q stands for queer. And the reason why this is important in this presentation is because you're going to have parents who call you from around the country, because I get this every week, and they're going to say, my son is saying that he's queer. And you say, well, does that mean he's gay? Does that mean he wants to be a woman? Or what does that mean exactly? So it's important to understand what these terms mean, because people use these terms, but you're not supposed to accept these terms as a Muslim the way they're being given to you. You have to identify your own terms. You have to understand, what does Islam say about these terms? So queer, Q stands for queer. And the word queer in English used to mean strange in Old English. So the reason why they chose the word queer is because it meant strange, but now they're reclaiming the identity of something strange as being something that is not strange. We're going to normalize it. So even though it was strange, we're going to make it something that is normal. So these letters, LGBT, if you add the Q, the first 4 letters become redundant. They don't even need to exist, because the Q represents a departure from the norm, which basically means if you have sexual abnormal, romantic sexual abnormal feelings or inclinations, you're in the Q category. If you have an inclination to be different than your biological gender, you're in the Q category. So Q could have actually replaced all of the other letters that are before it or that are after it. But the reason why it's not replacing them is because there's a philosopher by the name of Michel Foucault. And Michel Foucault, who was gay himself, by the way, he's homosexual. He died of HIV or AIDS or something like that when he went to Berkeley. He wrote about power structures. And he is somebody who's highly respected within many liberal postmodernist movements. So what he wanted to do, he understood, and based on his philosophy, is that you need to use power to normalize things or to dominate other power structures. So his thing was, and this is exactly what the LGBTQ movement has done, is they said the more letters we can add, the more it seems like there are lots of groups. There's lots of identities. You could add the entire alphabet. And if you keep on adding letters, it looks like there's so many different people, so many different groups. They bind together, and now there's more power for all of them. So this is about power. Even though it's going to result in power, and it's going to help result in confusion. So according to Wikipedia, last I checked, there's 107 gender identities. 107. Now there's male, there's female, and then there's 105 other ones. One of them is omnigender. Omnigender means all genders. One of them is agender, which means no gender. So if these are identities, and then you take the same exact terms and you put them in different languages because something happened in India and something happened in the Native American, and you take the same word and you add it as another identity, now you're like, whoa, before you had to just combat a third identity or a fourth identity. Now you have to combat 105. It's about power. And that's why I believe Muslims should not use the letters LGBTQIA whenever we're talking about a person. Because you're basically giving in to the narrative of claiming that power that has been set up. Anyways, I don't want to philosophize too much. Islam teaches, let me move on. Islam teaches that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created people as male and as female. And naturally, males are romantically attracted to females and vice versa. And so romantic relationships in Islam are only allowed through marriage. Marriage can only be between a male and a female. Therefore, homosexuality is forbidden in Islam. We don't need a dalil, to all of you, tulab al-ilm, and to a'imma who know this better than I do. Some people are born with physical abnormalities. If they have a deformity in their genitalia, or if they have a deformity in their chromosome, sometimes they can have a third chromosome. Rather than just XXXY, they could have a third chromosome as well. They are going to be labeled as intersex, where the I comes from. And in our classical books of fiqh, most of the translations of our fiqh books, whether it's Reliance of the Traveler or Mukhtasar Quduri or any of these books, usually khuntha or khuntha mushkil is translated as hermaphrodite. Hermaphrodite is a term which is considered politically incorrect. The reason why is because it also applies to plants and different animals and all of that, whereas intersex is a term that's saying, you know what, to be respectful for people who have these feelings, you were going to use the term intersex, you don't use the word hermaphrodite. But it's the same thing. Basically, from an Islamic perspective, nobody can change their biological gender by dressing a different way, by speaking a different way, by having hormones injected into them, by having some type of surgery performed on them. Person is going to be biologically male or biologically female the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created them. This is ijma'. Like ijma'. There's no difference of opinion on this. It's unanimous consensus when it comes to these things. But the attitude towards homosexuality and towards gender nonconformity, wanting to be a different gender, in the world today has changed over the past 30 years. It's gone from disgust. Many of you in your generation, if you grew up 30 years ago, movies would make fun of them. You could simply, people would have this aversion to the idea of homosexuality or the idea even of cross-dressing. So it went from disgust. It switched to ambivalence, like Bill Clinton's don't ask, don't tell policy. We don't really care, just leave people alone. Then it went from tolerance. We need to tolerate people who are like that. And then it's gone now to forced normalization, especially in places like California, in places like Toronto, Canada, and other parts. Forced normalization means it is in the curriculum of kindergartner schools, of kindergartners. You go into a library, even here in Houston, you go into a library and you will find a queer book that is normalizing queer behavior at the kindergarten level, at the pre-K level. We're not talking one book. We're not talking 2 books. We're talking hundreds of books at every single grade level. Where I come from in Orange County, California, this has been translated into Farsi, into Arabic, into Persian, into all the languages, and it's taught at the school level, even in the Santa Ana School District, which is primarily Latino. But there happen to be a lot of, Palestinians, and a lot of, Afghanis and other, refugees and stuff like that. They're targeting those children. So that's what's happening right now, which is why we need to make sure we address these topics very thoroughly and we address these topics properly. So let me start with the first topic. All of that was the intro, by the way. Okay. So parental responsibility. You know, children are قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. So parents have a responsibility to protect their children. They have a responsibility to teach their children what is right and wrong, to guide their children to make the right decisions, and to protect them from making the wrong decisions. So all of you are more knowledgeable than me. You know the verses in this respect. قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِكُمْ نَارًا كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. All of these ahadith, all of these verses of the Quran, they talk about parental responsibility. On the one hand, parents are responsible when they have control of their children to the extent that they have control over them. Once children reach the age of maturity, puberty, they're independent, they become financially independent, now the situation changes. Parents are going to be responsible to the extent that they did their job when they had that control. When your child is 10, when your child is 13, when your child is 16, still living under your roof, one situation. You have full responsibility and accountability over that. Once they move out, once they're independent, once you don't have any potential to control them now anymore, now you can simply guide them. The principle changes. وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. No one is going to be accountable for something that somebody else has done. So you're going to be accountable for the past. You're not going to be accountable for what decisions they make in life if you had done your part. The reason why this is extremely important is because many parents, probably some of you have had this issue, many parents will come and they're going to cry to you, and they're going to feel sad that my son has become gay, my daughter is, transitioning to a man, or I don't know, a robot or an animal or whatever it may be. Something's going on and I can't believe this is happening. Where did we go wrong? Did we make this mistake? And the answer is, well, right now, it's not in your control. Where did you go wrong in the past? Yeah, maybe you didn't give proper Islamic guidance. Maybe you shouldn't have let them hang out with all of those friends groups. Maybe you shouldn't have financed, all of those trips that they had taken, whatever it may be. So this is when it comes to parental responsibility. From the perspective of when they're young and you have control, definitely parents are responsible. From the perspective of when you don't have control anymore, then you're not going to have that level of responsibility. Identifying the true identity. If a child or another family member, let's say, claims to be queer, or to be gay, or to be trans, or whatever it means, whatever they say, it has two potential meanings. And I can't emphasize how important this point is right here. It is extremely important to clarify what they mean. It could mean one of two things. Number one, it could mean that they feel SSA. I want to keep hammering this term into everyone's mind. SSA is same-sex attraction. If somebody's feeling same-sex attraction, or they're feeling GD, they're feeling gender dysphoria, they may be struggling to make sense of that. They want to resist. They say, I know this is haram. I know I shouldn't do this, but what's going on with me? This is category number one. Category number two, which is sadly the majority of cases. Category number two is those people who are saying, I feel this way, and I don't care what you say. I don't care what Islam says. I feel this way and I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to act on my desires the way that it is. It is very important that you identify which category you're dealing with whenever it comes to a child or another family member or a friend or anybody else. This is one of the most important questions to ask. If they're in category number one, which I'll reiterate, if they're in category number one, it means that they're feeling this way. They're either feeling romantic attraction to the same gender, or they're feeling like they're not the biological gender that they are. These feelings, if they're struggling with that, and they're saying, I don't know what's going on with me, but I'm not trying to do anything that is against Islam, those people should get sympathy. They should get support, and they should get guidance. I shared my paper with somebody, and they suggested I add one change. add the word guidance in category number 1. And I thought it was great, so I added it, but it didn't get printed in your paper. So category number 1 should receive sympathy, support, and guidance on what is the right thing to do. Category number 2 is very different. That requires that boundaries be put in place, so that you're not dealing with people the same way. There's a category 1 and there's a category 2. Now this bifurcation, this dual categorization was hinted at by Imam Nawawi. Imam Nawawi in his sharh, in his commentary on the hadith about mukhannath, that they're supposed to be, they're cursed by the Prophet ﷺ. Hadith is in Bukhari. Imam Nawawi explains, he says there's 2 types of mukhannath. Mukhannath means an effeminate man, a person who is acting. It's not just about feeling. A person who is acting in an effeminate way, in a feminine way, with their speech or with their walking or whatever it may be. So Imam Nawawi says there's 2 types of mukhannath. Category number 1 is people who were created that way, and they're not trying to imitate women, but they just tend to dress a little bit like that, or speak a little bit like that, or move a little bit like that. Dress, okay, that's controversial. I'm going to leave that aside. I'll address that maybe later. But they're speaking in a certain way. They're moving in a certain way in which they talk, and it seems to resemble the women in the society in which you live in. It's arf, culturally conditioned. Imam Nawawi says for those people, there is no blame, there is no sin, there is no shame, and there is no punishment for them. He mentioned all 4 sifat, all 4 characteristics. I'll repeat it again. No blame, no sin, no shame, no punishment. Just think about what Imam Nawawi is saying. Saying if somebody's having this naturally, but they're not really doing it intentionally, they're in a completely different manner because it's coincidental. They're not choosing to do that. And he says the second type is the ones who are deliberately doing that. And that is what the hadith is referring to. The hadith is referring to the people who are deliberately trying to dress up like a woman, trying to talk like a woman, trying to act like a woman, cross-dressing, transvestite, whatever it is. That is the hadith is referring to those people who are cursed. So very important to understand that point. Expulsion or boundary. So the previous hadith, the same hadith that I just talked about, there's another version of the hadith which says, kick them out of your homes. The mukhannath. Kick them out. Now if you look at that, average person reads a hadith, and they say, well, it's authentic hadith, it's in Sahih al-Bukhari, we must take the hadith ala zahir, we take it literally. My son came and identified as gay, you're out of here. Get out of my house, don't want to see you, you're not invited to any parties, you're gone. Excommunicated completely. But this is not the way that scholars have understood the hadith. This is a super zahir reading of the hadith. If we look, again, Imam Nawawi, just one example, all the scholars say this, most of the scholars will say the same thing. Imam Nawawi can explain that, look, severing a family relationship is a very serious thing, right? This is breaking off family relations. So when it comes to the waqi' that we live in, we have to make a decision based on the qawaid fiqhiyah that we have. We have to make a decision based on what is the maslahah and what is the mafsada, what is the benefit and what is the potential harm that could result. So if we look at the power and the strength of the queer movement today, or the LGBT movement, I don't even like to use all the letters, cutting off ties with a child is going to cause them usually to go further away from Islam. And actually, because you have people willing to celebrate them and welcome them, and everyone's going to congratulate their brand new conversion, to this new identity that they found. And we find that in the story of Prophet Lut. He did not excommunicate the people he was speaking with. He continued to make da'wah with them. He continued to talk to them all the way until the end. So if parents or other family members, if they practice the hadith instead, la darar wa la dirar. There is no harming and there is no receiving harm. You don't harm anybody else and you don't don't allow yourself to be harmed. Again, this is one interpretation of the hadith. I know you all are aware of the other interpretations, but this is Imam Qarafi's interpretation as well as the other commentators on Muwatta. So how do we apply this principle in these situations? Number one, If you expel or excommunicate a child or a family member, it can oftentimes result in more harm by kicking them out, right? So it's not always the case, but in a situation where we don't have the tribal culture, the person is not going to feel, that attached to the tribe and feeling like they want to integrate into the tribe or into the clan or whatever it may be, then it's going to potentially cause them more harm. And number two, it doesn't mean that you condone any immoral behavior that they're doing. You say, well, if I don't kick them out, then I am approving of whatever they're doing. No, it means that you're going to be setting very clear boundaries because you need to protect the other family members, especially other children. You need to be protecting the Muslim community from normalizing something like this. So there is this principle. In al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyya, and all of you, most of you are fuqaha here, you know, al-darar yuzal, the harm should be removed. But then there's a sub-maxim, another qaida under the same qaida amma, which is al-darar la yuzalu bimithlihi. So that harm should not be removed by something of its like. So you don't remove a harm and then try to cause another harm to somebody else. So there's many examples. For the sake of time, it's in my paper. I'm not going to give you the examples, but basically the summary is that you have to think very carefully before taking an aggressive or hostile stance against a child or against an uncle or against some other member of the family who's claiming to be queer. It's very important to not overreact. Because if you overreact, you may harm the individual even more while trying to help them, guide them back to the straight path. So it's very important that we do that. This does not mean that we condone any sinful behavior ever, right? Obviously, the hadith, man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyiru biyadihi, whoever sees some evil should try to fix it in any way that they can. So it's important we have a balance between not alienating somebody who has committed sin, or even committing sin right now, but also not welcoming and condoning the sin that they're engaging in. So there's a clinical psychologist by the name of Dr. Henry Cloud. In his book called Boundaries, he talks about setting healthy boundaries is actually protection for yourself and it's kindness to the other person. So I'm not going to elaborate on that. There's another Nedra Glover Tawwab. I don't think she's Muslim, by the way, even though her name is Tawwab. Inshallah, may Allah make her, do tawbah, and, come to the right path. But she has a book called Set Boundaries, Find Peace. And in her book, she talks about an interesting phenomenon. She says that boundaries in relationships don't cause people to become further as you might think. It actually allows people to come closer. So the idea of setting boundaries is extremely important. Simple example you can say is you tell somebody, or you can advise somebody, say, listen, you're always welcome in this house, but your boyfriend is not welcome. See, simple. It's like when it comes to drugs, same thing. You will always be welcome in our home, but your marijuana, or your fentanyl, or your heroin is not going to be welcome here. That is showing the love, welcoming, but showing the boundary. If you're coming in with your weed, you're not coming in this house. You're coming in without the weed, you are more than welcome. So that's kind of an example of the balance. Utilize the, wait, I went the wrong way. Utilize the remaining, I got it. Utilize the remaining influence and control you have. When children are young, you have a level of control over them. Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he talks about that when you look, it results in a thought. The thought results in an idea. The idea results in a desire. The desire becomes stronger and then causes people to do something haram. So you have to cut it off at the root. And Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned something similar. He talks about how looking at the face of a beardless youth with some desire is like looking at the face of a mahram woman or even a non-mahram woman with some type of desire. He says that needs to be cut off completely, otherwise the desires will continue. Based on that, parents should restrict and control the internet usage of their children. They should monitor the children that they hang out with. And they should not finance any behavior that is going to help them towards sin. This is one of the biggest problems. I get this all the time. Parents come and say, my child is doing this. I don't understand what's going on. The first thing, I think it's black magic. Before it's black, I'm telling you, I just got yesterday another thing. My child, he crashed his brand new BMW. We think it's black magic. Okay. Did you ever investigate that maybe you shouldn't have bought him? Super fast car? Did you look into what type of friends he's hanging out with? It was very important that parents utilize the influence and control that they have. Lastly, seeking the right help. Seeking the right help is extremely important. There's a misconception. Do not believe this misconception that people cannot change their sexual attraction and that nobody can change their feelings of gender dysphoria or resist them. This is not true. Islam doesn't say that it's true, and scientific evidence shows that it's not true. Number one, Prophet Lut offered his daughters, depending on what ta'wil you give to the verse, he offered to solve their problem. He wouldn't have offered if there wasn't an Islamic solution for that. When it comes to science, there's a Journal of Human Sexuality where it's peer-reviewed. They have talked about how so many people have been able to resist and modify their sexual attraction. There's entire frameworks. Dr. Yarhouse has a sexual identity therapy framework. Dr. Joseph Nicolosi has a reparative therapy framework. Dr. Omar Hussein is going to be speaking about that more tomorrow in our program. So it's extremely important that parents research properly, really research properly, and make sure that they don't choose pseudoscientific conversion therapies, because that's more harmful, but that they also don't go with affirmative therapy counselors. And I think Dr. Umar is going to say in tomorrow's program very clearly, one of the worst things you could ever do is refer a child to a therapist, even if that therapist is a Muslim. So I wanted to say it here before he says it there. I'll repeat it one more time, if you give me 30 seconds. It's very important to not simply refer out to a therapist who doesn't know the Islamic position on things. The last thing is that this is obviously haram. Ijma' doesn't need a dalil, nothing else to talk about. And my conclusion is that we as Muslims, we must be proud of Islamic values. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. We're one of the few minorities that's standing. The Catholic Church has recently given in. The Mormons are going to be giving in. Almost all the evangelical Christians are even afraid to speak about this issue. We should realize that whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited something, there's always a deep wisdom behind that prohibition. We should stick to our principles. It will actually lead to self-respect for the people who we actually care about their respect. So never be afraid of being mocked, never be afraid of being insulted. Speak with wisdom, but speak with confidence. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us and guide us to navigate through this difficult challenge that we're going through. Ameen.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh Mustafa. Greatly appreciate that. Before we start the Q&A session, inshallah, I'd like to invite our sponsors up to the stage from Pure Hands and Jurudi Dispute Resolution. So can our sponsors that have something to say, please join me on the stage, inshallah. Pure Hands first. So Pure Hands, Bismillah.
My name is Yusuf Jarudi. You probably remember me from yesterday's 4 o'clock presentation where we unveiled the AMJA product. Somebody here actually told me, and we're going to make this very short. I know there's a lot of questions here. One of the Imams told me that it reminded him of an Apple keynote release. Like we were releasing something big. Alhamdulillah, that's good. Yeah, we're getting there, that means, as far as AMJA goes. Anyhow, when it comes to mediation arbitration, you know what's in that agreement that's inshallah going to be provided? The meat of that agreement is a mediation and arbitration clause. So eventually, inshallah, we're going to have an influx of mediation and arbitration requests. Who's going to do that? Is it just one organization enough to do that? No. Each one of you, inshallah, should be trained, should be, encouraging and handling at least mediation. Okay? So that's what I do, actually, as a lawyer myself. inshallah, I'm ready to, if you call me or you email me, I have a table outside. I will, inshallah, just walk you through, because, when you have mediation, you literally need somebody to write down that agreement if they reach an agreement, and you need somebody to distribute via DocuSign or print it out. You need somebody to handle the legalities. If the imam can do it themselves, great. But most likely, and what the elephant in the room really no one's mentioning, is that you need not only the imam to be a mediator, but it really helps to have a lawyer or somebody well-versed to co-mediate with you as a neutral party, help you, kind of guide you through the process, type it, and have everyone sign. The way mediation works, you put, for example, in a divorce dispute, and this is not counseling. This is, they decided to divorce, khalas. Petition is filed most likely. You put the wife in a room, you put the husband in a room. Separate rooms, that's the most common style. It's called caucus style. The imam, the mediator, and myself, if I'm included, we go from room to room, conveying the offer. Okay, you want the house, but I want the children. For example, we take that to the other side. He said, no, I want the son, I want the children, but you know what? I'll give you like this nafaqa. And it goes back and forth, and it takes hours. I've done it with Sheikh Walid Basyouni. I've done it with Sheikh Mamdouh. I work with them. We don't have a company together, no. I'm just, each of us is independent person, and we are both hired by the couple. Can you force the couple to do mediation? No. But if they agreed beforehand in a prenup, of course, yes, you can. But most likely in this scenario, the couple needs to come to an imam they trust. The imam, once you get somebody, you say, okay, let's make it happen. Let's make it legally binding. Put it in writing. Then you contact me, give me their emails. I will schedule a date and time. I'm based in Houston, Texas, but this can be conducted, obviously in other states, right? And we can do it through Zoom. There's something called breakout rooms, right? You can put people in breakout rooms in Zoom, and you can jump back and forth. It's just as effective as in person. And then last thing I will say, arbitration is where you are making the Shar'i decision. You have to be very careful. You need to make sure you're qualified. A committee is recommended. And again, and this is where you make the decision for them. They're not coming to an agreement like in mediation. So let me know if you need me to assist you in any way. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah khairan to our sponsors. We will now proceed with the Q&A portion of our session. Just a reminder, inshallah, right after this session, we have an open Q&A session. So if we are not able to address all of the questions now, we will continue into the next session, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. As a reminder to our questioners, please try to keep your questions as concise as possible, inshallah. And we will begin with over here, Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khairan. My first question is about the rainbow sign. What is your advice? Can we talk to the kids about it, or just let it like that? Because some say no, if you keep talking about it, they'll be thinking about it, because rainbow existed before these group come out. So do we have to tell them, oh, this is LGBT, don't look at it, don't do it? And then secondly, what we have to do as an imam with the youth, for example, at the weekend school, or do we have would you advise to talk to them about these LGBTQ, or just leave it like that? Because some say, oh no, when you talk it, they're gonna think about it. No, even though they hearing from, when they're watching videos or whatever at school.
Yeah.
So what is your advice as an imam what we can do?
Did you say the Red Bull sign?
Rainbow.
Oh, the rainbow sign. Okay, yeah. Rainbow. It's like, what's wrong with the Red Bull sign? Okay. Sure. Okay. So the first question was what I think about the rainbow sign. And the second question was, when should we start talking to Muslim youth about this topic? So these are great questions. First question is the rainbow sign is if you read a book called After the Ball, which was written in the 1990s. Actually, Imam Siraj Wahaj gave me this source. It talked about how the movement was going to normalize this behavior, and they've been planning for decades. Since the 1960s, 1970s, they've been planning exactly how they're going to normalize it. One way to normalize it was to pick a sign or a symbol that is going to be the most effective. And the rainbow is the most beautiful. I mean, it's such a master evil master plan, because number one, the rainbow represents colors, and colors represent race. And if you say that, you know what, you equate queerness with race, then if you don't accept what's going on, then it's equivalent to racism. So that was deliberately chosen. The second reason is because rainbows appeal to children. And all children love rainbows. I mean, I love rainbows too, you know. So this was done on purpose. So I believe we need to somehow reclaim the rainbow and protect people from rainbows. So what do you do with kids? I mean, I'm not a specialist, but what I did with my own kids is that wherever we go, one of them's here, by the way, wherever we go, we walk into Target, I explained to them, I said, there's a good rainbow and there's an evil rainbow. And my daughter came up with this, and she's like, the way we can identify both, actually, is the rainbow that has the clouds underneath, and it's got the arch, that's usually the good rainbow. So if we go in the children's section or something, and there's like a little sticker that they want to put on the wall or whatever, if it's got the clouds, this is for kids, obviously. You know, they're like, that's the good rainbow. But when we walk into a Target or a Walmart, whatever it is, and we see it's Pride Month, and then there's like rainbow cups and all of that stuff, yes, we should tell them, we're not buying those rainbow cups because that is the evil rainbow. And the evil rainbow represents all of this LGBTQ movement. So it's very important to teach them that, reclaim the rainbow somehow, and oppose the evil rainbow while still welcoming the good rainbow with the clouds and all of that stuff, you know. So that's number one. Number two, question about youth. How young should you start teaching youth? Well, I live in California. So I started at age 4, and people thought I'm crazy. So this guy's a psycho, you know. How could you teach your kids about that? Well, in an age-appropriate way, you teach the stories of Prophet Lut. They should be learning the stories of all the prophets. What happens is, in a lot of Sunday schools and stuff, they skip Prophet Lut. This is not, you know, good for children. We can't talk about that. Until when? 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They are being targeted at preschool. 100%. I have all the evidence I can show you. They are being targeted, at least in California, and in New York, and in Toronto. I know for sure. So why not be the one to get to your children first and set a foundation for them? Once they've set a foundation, somebody else teaches them something, that new information is placed in the foundation that you've set. If you don't get to them first, somebody else will set a foundation, an evil foundation, right? The evil rainbow foundation. And then when you tell them, oh, by the way, this is not allowed in Islam, that will be placed into the foundation that they've already set. And it's pretty hard to undo that. So why not get an advantage? So start in an age-appropriate way at 4 and 5 with the basic Prophet Lut. You know, men wanted to marry men and women wanted to marry women. And then you teach them again at age 7, teach them again at age 9. So, you know, we do a review every single year. My son is 10, he's here. He attends all my lectures on LGBT, you know, whenever he's with me. And I have no shame, I have no fear, I have no worry that he's sitting here attending this lecture and listening to this, because I know that he's going to encounter this stuff at school or with his friends or whatever it is, wherever he goes. I'll tell you, I don't have time for a story, but, you know, tomorrow in my session, I have a story about a homeschooled kid whose parents kept them away from everything at the age of 5 and still got exposed on the playground. Story for tomorrow, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. We'll move to the other side of the room, inshallah. Bismillah.
Hello, assalamu alaikum. So one of the things it seems that queer communities' approach to people with gender identity is based on the medical community's approach to intersex people, specifically those with chromosome and genitalia abnormalities. Generally in the medical community, the children and the parents of the child are effectively asked what does the child want to be by their behavior or by their explicit, and then they're given the hormones and the surgery accordingly. My first question is what is the Islamic thought of that approach in the medical community? And my second question is, how do we convince others who are not intersex that it does not apply to them?
Okay. And you are differentiating between intersex and gender dysphoria? That's why I want to make sure your question is only about intersex, or it's also about gender dysphoria as well.
The first question is specifically about intersex.
Got it.
Approach to them, and the second question is those who are not intersex but have the gender dysphoria.
Got it. Okay. So to repeat the question, rephrase the question, the medical community has the general approach of asking children what they want to do when it comes to them being intersex, meaning there's a physical chromosomal abnormality or a physical abnormality in their genitalia. What does Islam say about that approach? And the second question was, what about gender dysphoria where they are not intersex? They're being asked about what they want to do. Okay, so again, there's no clear-cut verse or hadith about this, but in general, when it comes to somebody who's intersex, making the change, making the surgery or the adjustment or whatever it is that they need, this is something that is done on a medical level and it's allowed in Islam. But there's no medical procedure that I'm aware of that a surgeon goes and asks a 9-year-old child, hey, we want to know what you would like to do. What do you think is good for you? If you have, some issue in your fingers or you have some issue going on, whatever it may be, you don't ask a child, hey, would you like to get the surgery done or not? The doctor or surgeon is supposed to just do what they believe is the best for this child. In every other surgery, and this is the irony of it. The irony of it is you can't get a tattoo until you're 16 years old, right? And yet you can get an entire gender operation. You can start taking hormones, cross-sex hormones, at the age of 12. This is crazy. So this is actually hypocrisy, and it's a type of insanity. And yet, sadly, this is what's becoming the dominant position in the medical community. When it comes to gender dysphoria, so that's the first question on intersex. When it comes to gender dysphoria, it's the exact same thing, but it's worse. It's worse because the surgeon is basically complicit in not only thinking what the long-term consequences are going to be for this child that they're going to be operating on or prescribing hormones for, and the long-term studies show how detrimental this really is, especially when rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is the most gender dysphoria, desists by puberty. Dr. Umar Hussain is going to cover this. 80% of cases are going to desist by puberty. To ask a child, to what they think or what they want to do is absolutely insane. From a purely rational perspective, and obviously Islamic perspective would be the exact same thing. So it doesn't make sense for the intersex case. It makes absolutely no sense for the gender dysphoria case. Yeah.
Jazakumullah khairan. We'll take one last question for this session, inshallah. Bismillah.
Jazakallah khair. My question is more to do with the increase in having male to female transgender individuals entering into female spaces. I know that...
Could you repeat that first sentence?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's any guidance that you would give to, I guess, imams and families as well about the increase in male to female transgender individuals entering female-only spaces. So, for example, a women's gym that has a large female Muslim clientele, all of a sudden starts accepting transgender, male to female person in that gym, in that space.
You mean like women's only gyms?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Or even masajid. I know the cases are rare, but they seem to be increasing, where somebody's interested in Islam and they had their previous life, but now they've maybe transitioned. So I'm curious to know if there's any guidance for imams who have to deal with that in their communities, and for families who may have women in these gyms or in these spaces where you have an individual coming in. I know, when it comes to eunuchs or those effeminate men, that maybe the guidelines might be a bit different, but I'm not sure how that would apply in these situations. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair.
So the question was basically, how do we deal with, all women's gyms where transgender biological men are coming in and into those spaces and there's Muslim women attending? And also, how do we deal with the situation in a masjid where, a transitioned, quote unquote, man wants to pray in the women's area, or a woman transition wants to pray in the men's area, or something along those lines, where there are supposed to be gender segregation in those spaces, but the gender segregation is being overstepped by a re-identification of gender. So that's actually tomorrow's topic in detail. So that's good. We have a whole topic on it. The super short answer is, from an Islamic perspective, biological sex/gender cannot change. So if somebody's a biological male, it doesn't matter what they've done in their life to themselves or whatever it is, they're still biological male. They need to respect the gender segregation of the spaces that they're in, whether it's a bathroom, whether it's a masjid prayer line, whether it's an all women's gym or all men's gym or whatever it may be. And it's very tricky to enforce that, but that's the general principle. And then tomorrow we'll talk about some guidelines of what we can do and stuff like that, inshallah. So hopefully that helps.
Jazakumullah khairan. That brings this session to a conclusion. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. I will ask the previous panelists that